Come on in. For 2 years, I felt debilitating nausea, chronic pain, and the worst mental health crisis of my life. I can confidently say one of the first times I felt this physical, debilitating pain was in May of 2022 while I was driving to a funeral for a dear friend. By the end of that year, my esophagus and stomach pain became so much more frequent that I started calling my doctor in Virginia.
December of 2023, I received a call from Michael Joe, who was living in Seattle at the time, and he had been experiencing some problems with reflux type symptoms.
In 2023, I began vomiting every single day. If I hadn't eaten yet, I'd wake up and I'd start dry heaving. If I was cold, if I was stressed, if I was anxious, if I was at the gym working out, I feel this debilitating pain still. And meanwhile, my mental state was rapidly declining. I was experiencing severe paranoia, depression, and intrusive thoughts. And I thought the mental pain was somehow associated with what was going on in my stomach. So by 2024, I decided over-the-counter antacid medication and cutting out coffee wasn't doing enough. So I checked myself in the ER, I went to a cardiologist and then a gastrologist, and everyone I spoke to said I was having a bad case of acid reflux.
Mikey was being super proactive about his health, going to multiple doctors and multiple specialists for over a year trying to figure out what was going on.
When it would happen, my body would get tense, I'd feel overwhelmed, and my eyes would water, my hands would get tight, and I would feel like I was embracing for death.
There were a few times where it sounded like his teeth were chattering or he was making a weird noise with his mouth, and I asked him, "Are you chewing something? Is something in your mouth?" And he would just look at me and say, "No, I just feel really nauseous."
We had just finished hiking Haybrook Lookout, and we were driving back along Highway 2. We stopped to get a burger. So we sat down, Mike took a bite of it, and then he kind of just froze for a second. So his jaw kind of clenched and the burger just fell out of his mouth. And then 3 seconds later, he snapped out of it and he said, "Oh man, this acid reflux."
His guitar in his hand, and he had kind of just stopped in his tracks, and seemed like he kind of went a little pale.
It was like you almost like there was something stuck in your throat, and I was worried you were gonna fall down. I'd never seen it in real time, and then the next day when it happened again in this basement when we were recording, everyone was looking at you really concerned, and it was like this happened yesterday. But it seemed like it was ramping up.
He stopped talking briefly. He looked really pale. He was kind of like lurking over and put his arm around me, and I walked with him out the door, and it was really sudden, and I didn't know what happened, and he was in the middle of telling me about something. And we stepped out the door, and he looked very flushed still, and his eyes were kind of like hollow, and there was like a tear in his eye, and I was like, "Hey, are you okay?" And I like put my hand on his shoulder, and he like kind of like suddenly came to and was like, yeah, like it's just this nausea reflux thing I've been having.
In April, I had a tour booked on the East Coast with Seattle band Small Paw around the release of my 6th album, Secrets of Atlantis. I flew back to Virginia ahead of the tour on April 10th for Steph's book signings for The Recipe for Yellow, as well as the funeral for my godfather, Joe Taylor, who passed away on March 11th. My godfather, Joe, was best friends with my doctor, Galen Heathcote, and his son, Ben, and I shared Joe as a godfather. So Ben flew in from LA to Virginia for the funeral. And the day after the funeral, on April 16th, I took Ben and his partner to Joe's favorite restaurant in town.
We're there, we're enjoying our lunch. It's myself, it's Michael Joe, and it's my partner. And we're, catching up. I remember specifically we were talking about Bruce Springsteen. And then in the middle of Michael Joe speaking, I described it as like he started to fade and his jaw went slack. His hands tensed up, like both of his hands were like working hard, and you know, at first it was like, oh, maybe he's like searching for a thought or something, but his hands were like really tense and his jaw was slack, and he like looked down, and then, you know, saliva started to come from his mouth, and this lasted a whole minute, and a minute of like silence in the middle of conversation, you know, when you're at a booth, feels like much longer than that. After about a minute, he sort of like shook it off, and then he picked right back up with that same thought, like talking about Bruce Springsteen. He like finished the same thought, looked a little dazed, and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, this acid reflux. Hey, yeah, don't worry about it, it's okay. And then we just carried on, right? Like nothing had happened, but, you know, clearly something did happen. So, you know, it so happens that I come from a medical family. When we got home after the lunch, I talked to my stepmother, who was a nurse in the ER for a long time, and then afterwards I talked to my dad, who's a doctor, and you know, described the situation to them, and they're like, you know, that sounds like a seizure. And that made a lot, you know, more sense to me than acid reflux. So
I was sent to get an MRI the following morning. Dr. Heathcote called me up and said, Michael Joe, this is not acid reflux. You need to get an MRI immediately. And that morning before the MRI, I went unconscious again. So I was admitted to the hospital that morning on April 17th. And that evening, all my answers were laid right before me.
The first encounter was with Dr. Galen Heathcote, who was driving north with a friend to go fishing. And he said, hey, I have a family friend, and I think something's wrong. I think he might be having seizures. Could you do me a favor and see him? So I happened to be late in the hospital that night. We got you into the hospital. I came to the room. You were a young man and very engaged, but literally in the first 10 minutes of my encounter with you, with monitoring of brain waves, you had 3 seizures during that time period. And they were all lateralized. They were all to the right cerebral hemisphere. I knew that imminently something significant was going on. And your wife had been my patient, and so she was able to have good insight into what had been happening, and rapidly the previous 2 years of ill-defined symptoms you had that evaded diagnosis suddenly made sense.
Dr. Lyons was my neurologist years ago, and I have generalized epilepsy, and I have had that I know of about 5 seizures in my life. I've been seizure-free for years thanks to him and modern medication, and those few seizures drastically impacted my life so much that it was hard for me to wrap my head around the fact Michael was having multiple a day.
Not only was the debilitating pain occurring multiple times a day, but my taste was completely off. And toothpaste tasted spicy, water tasted soapy. That started around early March.
One day I poured Michael a glass of water, and he immediately spit it out and told me I must have left soap in the Brita filter after cleaning it because the water tasted terrible and really soapy, but I hadn't washed the Brita filter, so I had no idea what he was talking about.
Temporal lobe epilepsy involves the amygdala and the mesotemporal lobe part of the brain. That part of the brain is involved, the amygdala involved in emotional response, and do involve a lot of gustatory or taste or gut related disturbances.
The evening of April 9th still is the worst night of my entire life. I felt like I had no control over my mind. Everything that I had been feeling for 2 years, this paranoia, this loneliness, it all consumed me in that one moment. I felt like the end was the only thing in sight. The only reason I'm here today is because of Steph.
What is a manifestation of epilepsy? The mental illness, the OCD, the anxiety, the problems with learning and memory and thought and personality, all those things, they're the result of an epileptic process as pathological. We don't describe it as epilepsy because we think epilepsy are seizures. But all those other symptoms you described are equally part of the epilepsy process. Classically limit ourselves to describing epilepsy as seizures, but maybe sometimes at the service of patients, all those other symptoms that were frankly more disabling were that it actually is not uncommon that what ultimately drives many of my adult patients with epilepsy surgery is not just the seizures, it's the impact on personhood. What the seizures were, in hindsight, they were gustatory disturbances or abnormalities of the stomach, premonitions of something bad that had happened, altered taste, and ultimately convulsions. So collectively diagnosed of temporal lobe epilepsy. 40% of patients are behind the 8 ball, meaning they've had months, if not years, of seizures before they come to see a doctor with their first quote-unquote seizure. We need to get to the point where we're making interventions early on in the course.
When Michael got his official diagnosis, it was only the 3 of us in the room, Dr. Lyons, myself, and Michael. And Dr. Lyons made sure to note that epilepsy is not contagious, and he didn't get it from me.
He also informed me that the surgeon that would be performing it was seeing fish at the Sphere in Las Vegas, which, to be honest with you, really sealed the deal for me.
I'm a fake real fish head is probably the best way to call it. So first of all, I was prepared ahead of time that Dr. Lyons had a patient for epilepsy surgery admitted directly to the hospital, and that right there, you just never know what you're going to walk into. It's a very stressful situation for the patients, and when I walked in there and saw you with a smile on your face and all the electrodes and the guitar, I knew you had healthy coping mechanisms and resources to be able to deal with the stress that you were going to get. So
a couple days later, everyone's in my room waiting around for a seizure to happen, and I looked at the food on my table and I asked the techs if they could hand me the almonds that were in the little bowl. I took a fistful and immediately had a seizure. And there was also a debate at that point whether or not the lesion was in fact a glioma or a congenital abnormality called cortical dysplasia.
The MRI was quickly read by the first neuroimager who thought it was a glioma, and further evaluation of the team, which we'll talk about in a minute, that was questioned. We realized it may be a benign congenital abnormality called cortical dysplasia.
a lot of patients with epilepsy, we can't be that confident. And then a lot of patients can have a lesion and it has nothing to do with their seizures. The nice thing is we were able to cheat a little bit in your case because your MRI was abnormal. We were able to see a spot that looked not like it was supposed to. And then your EEG was very specific and correlated with that location. It was enough that without actually taking a piece out and putting it under a microscope and seeing what it is, there was no way to be confident about it.
It can be the result of a genetic mutation. It can be a result of trauma early on in life, or it can be the result of an infection again. But that being said, the only definitive way to establish that would be a resection. And then also, unfortunately, cortical dysplasia is the most common type of drug-resistant epilepsy in children, and the second most common cause of drug-resistant in adults. So even if we hadn't done epilepsy surgery now, statistically there was a high probability that you were going to fail medication treatment.
Michael had so many visitors coming in and out of that hospital room, and there were so many pairs of shoes going in and out of that hospital room that I had to start cleaning and sweeping up each day.
It was a real event to visit Michael Joe in the hospital. I think he brought a lot of goodwill to the people working there. I think was very relieved from the standpoint that he finally was at a point that he was moving forward with at least knowing what had been causing his problems.
Mark came down to Virginia to visit me while I was in the hospital with my friends Jasmine and Moy and his wife Katie, and Mark brought his accordion to my hospital room.
So it was 2 days before tour was about to start. The Small Paul Mike Frazier tour. We had been planning it together for months. I remember him saying, you know, I had this incident yesterday. I need to go get surgery ASAP, and I'm not going to be able to go on this tour. And he was really just being the wonderful person that he is. He was really apologetic about it, but you know, when we got off the phone, I remember him saying, like, you guys should still do the tour.
Michael was in the hospital getting life-changing news, looking at brain surgery coming in a week, and was still coordinating the tour the entire time.
On the way home from the MRI, I volunteered to drive the van to Asbury Park, New Jersey, to Mateo's house, and Mateo and Mark actually saved the tour.
And there was one day where he was hooked up to an EEG and an EKG. He got a FaceTime call from one of his friends on the tour of Small Paul performing one of his songs. And he got really excited to see that, and he started singing along and sat up in bed and his face lit up. And before I knew it, there were alarms going off and multiple nurses running into our room saying, "Are you okay? Did he have a seizure? Did he fall? Your heart rate just spiked. What's going on?" And Michael just looked at all the nurses in the eye and said, "Nope, that was just the power of rock and roll."
I remember on one of the last dates of the tour, we stopped by the hospital and checked in on Mike, and Mike also made it through the surgery and persevered.
Dr. Selznick came to visit me the morning after the surgery. He said, "Congrats, I got everything, and while I was operating on your brain, I was listening to your music. I really enjoyed it. You sound a lot like Neil Young."
You know Mikey loved hearing that.
I didn't sleep for about 2 weeks. The pain was so intense. Actually, 4 nights after I got out of the hospital, I was sitting in my parents' basement and I had a visitation where this "Where the Wild Things Are" looking character waltzes into the room, and it looks at me. It goes, "Uncle Joe sent me, and he just wanted to check on you, see how you were doing. I used to visit him too, and don't worry, you'll be fine. Also, we really enjoyed the songs you wrote about us. And you know, pain is just a part of the human experience, so you're lucky to be feeling it. That means you're alive."
Seeing your partner in that much excruciating pain, but especially your young, newlywed husband and the guy who's usually softening and brightening up the pain of you and everyone else around him, was beyond heartbreaking.
It was a congenital birth defect that I've been living with my whole life. And I sure am lucky they found it, because it feels real good to be here today.
I mean, I think a good analogy is like you're trying to have a conversation with me, and you always have like a radio in the background going, and it's always there, and you didn't even know it was playing. You just had to pay a little extra attention to try and listen to somebody. Now that radio's off.
It was a very scary time for all of his friends and family and loved ones from near and far, the people that care about him and people that wanted to make sure he was okay.
I imagine a lot of people in that situation are like staring immortality right in the eye.
And I hope for the future, which is there'll be more treatments for the patients who are not epilepsy surgery candidates. And then these stories that such as yours are really what drives programs and clinicians who have rather long days and nights in achieving the goals of our patients.
I held on and continue to hold on and be reassured to this unwavering hope that Mikey was going to be okay, and that didn't mean it wasn't going to be the hardest thing he ever goes through, but he was going to be all right. We're more than all right.
It felt like I'd be able to live again.
Pain feels real in the moment. What do I get when my mind is too much to bear?
Something no one asked for, me doing an acoustic guitar solo. Different version, and Mateo goes, "That sounds like Dogwood Tales," and I started smiling. And
That's awesome.
so I said, "Okay, so that's the version we're doing."
Bright lights in the desert skies. I swear that I wasn't high when I saw it flying overhead.
have to have Owen recut it with you guys?
No.
No? Okay, no. Producer Mike is vicious.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Exactly.
Got it so bad. Shenandoah blue.
I tremendously downplayed how painful brain surgery would be.
Willie Nelson.
I thought if the seizures went away, then I wouldn't feel this mental pain anymore. I wasn't ready for the panic attacks that started a few weeks after the surgery, or how physically painful getting brain surgery would be. Now I know how many times I unknowingly seized behind the wheel. I was constantly replaying the last 2 years. So I began doing yoga, meditating, I started EMDR therapy, and that's helped tremendously with managing the PTSD, but the support system around me is invaluable. The kind and loving community around me has continued to grow, and on November 3rd, I had a pretty cosmic moment at a show in Woodstock, Virginia. I had a panic attack on my way to the show and couldn't stop crying. I still played the show, but cut my set a little short. Right as I was putting my guitar away, this dude comes up to me and he goes, "Hey man, are you just getting started?" I said, "No dude, I'm done for the day. I'll be real with you. I had brain surgery back in April and I'm still just trying to get my stamina back." And he goes, "No way, I had brain surgery too. What did you have it for, if you don't mind me asking?" And I told him exactly what happened. And he looks at me and goes, "You're one of us. There's a group of 10 people about to walk in here, part of an epilepsy support group. And we get together all the time, and we just heard there was going to be some music at this place, so..."
Mentioned about your surgery and stuff, your brain surgery and all, and then I was thinking in my mind, like, should I ask him? And then I was like, yeah, why not? And then when you told me that you were like epileptic, you know, that's when I was saying, like, yeah, we're an epilepsy group right here. Like, it's a group of us. We come in here, listen to some good music, and believe it or not, the musician is epileptic.
The place we've noticed, this was the Woodstock Brewery.
We were all like really listening to your words, because like a story that we've all gone through.
Yeah, we've never heard songs about epilepsy. We never have.
No.
You know, you hear a lot of topics in music, but we never heard songs about epilepsy, and it went straight to our hearts.
Especially because of that song, I'm Gonna Heal My Mind.
You know, our group started in 2017. We got almost like 500 members now as an epilepsy support group.
All I can say is I'm not a religious person, but the number of coincidences that night was pretty amazing.
We have different stories, all of us.
All 6 of us that are talking together right now, we have 6 different versions of epilepsy. And
it was just such a special reminder of I'm not alone, you know, and I felt alone for a really, really long time.
All of us, you know, we've had part of our lives taken away. You know, we've had it changed because of the epilepsy. We've either had our brain cut out like me, we're taking meds, we've had surgeries, we've on pills, we can't do certain things. That's 5% of your life you got taken away. Well, that makes you really, really, really treasure the other 95% of your life.
Because you sang the song, it just stuck in my mind up to now. Each time I get a headache or if I'm going to sleep, in my head I'm saying, I'm gonna heal. I'm gonna heal. It still comes into my mind up to now.
We're gone.